Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's very important to echo the gratitude to the hosts and to all of you here present today. Thank you for attending. My name is Toni Christiansen. I will be the moderator of this very distinguished panel. Before we start, I'd like to just preface my remarks with a few introductory statements to set the stage for further discussion and recommendations. The dynamic private sector is indispensable to a more holistic, resilience-based approach to the Syrian crisis. Groundbreaking solutions, such as those featured in the innovation market outside, highlight the private sector's ability to do well and to do good at the same time, creatively, efficiently, and profitably. The cash voucher-based assistance and refugee registration solutions are two prime examples of new ways of doing business, with dignity for those affected, greater cost savings due to the elimination of duplication and corruption, as well as promoting local entrepreneurs. These solutions are innovative models of private sector-driven public-private partnerships. That said, it is noteworthy to acknowledge the significant participation of the private sector to date that is focused primarily on addressing the shorter-term needs in coordination with the humanitarian entities. The private sector is really the key driver of change, transformation, and acceleration in a resilience-based response. By expanding financial resources for business, by deploying planning, management, and implementation capabilities, creating jobs and providing training skills for both local as well as refugee populations, identifying the demand for local products, and encouraging international businesses to look at value-added propositions and platforms for investment. Due to the instability and uncertainty in the current situation, activating private sector at a broad base will not be easy. That said, a more surgical, strategic approach is needed to lay the foundation for an integrated resilience-building program. This would include the country-specific and national government-approved strategies. These are the ones that are tailored to the nature and magnitude of the challenge and the opportunities in each country. A common agenda with regional facilitation to launch successful programs, reduce duplication, enable rapid replication, and at the same time, achieve a more efficient execution. Based on the consultations with various stakeholders in the region, a three-step approach to fostering greater private engagement is possible and required. The first step, reinforcing state capacity by establishing a joint public-private planning, execution, and evaluation unit in each country. This would be anchored at the highest level of government in order to translate needs into concrete programs. Step 2, utilizing standardized social, public, and private partnerships in collaboration with donors to deliver fast impact and benefit from economies of scale. This would build on private sector execution capacity in the areas of utilities, food, healthcare, and education to cater to the needs and create opportunities, again, for the host communities as well as for refugees. And step 3, implementing targeted flagship initiatives for quick economic impact. This would include support for micro, small, and medium enterprises and entrepreneurship. We would also involve upgrading existing special economic zones in affected areas to create jobs, again, for both hosting community populations and refugees. And finally, promoting export of locally produced goods and services, the usage of technology, which has been very efficient, and regional integration of value chains. Our mandate for this session is to identify some concrete steps to broaden and deepen the involvement of the private sector in resilience building. We look forward to hearing from the members of this distinguished panel. I would like to ask each of them to commit to one concrete project they will support to promote private sector participation. These ideas, in addition to any recommendations for overcoming gaps and obstacles, will also inform our question and answer period. With that, I would like to ask our distinguished panel members and call upon Mr. Stefan Kapferer to please provide his remarks. Mr. Kapferer is the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD. He has worked in many fields, including human social capital, skills strategy, SME local development, gender strategy, health, equality, entrepreneurship. Have I forgotten anything yet? I mean, he's very well-rounded, and I think he'll be able to contribute greatly to our discussions. And prior to that, he was the State Secretary at the German Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy. Thank you, sir. Please, we're looking forward to your remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Toni. Maybe my former post as a Secretary of State in the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energy in Germany is closely linked to what we want to discuss today, but be sure that also the OECD is working a lot with the idea how can we strengthen the involvement of the private sector here in the region to improve the situation. And I think it is a clear proof the fact that today we have 4 panels, 2 in parallel now, 4 panels, and one of these panels is looking at the situation, how can we engage the private sector to improve the situation, is a clear proof that the situation is really bad here in the region, because we are all used to a situation that most people are convinced that this is a public good and this is a challenge and a responsibility of the public administration and the governments. I think when we look at the short-term perspective, it is very clear that the private sector engagement can be increased, very clear, but it's not so easy. I think, first of all, it is possible to deliver more goods and services we need to improve the situation in the host countries by the private sector. We are used to a situation that this is often organized by NGOs or by the public sector. I can imagine we can develop innovative models in a short-term prospect to do it also by the private sector. I think we have to look especially from a short-term perspective to the question of how can we include small and medium-sized companies as producers, as service providers in our value chains by delivering these products to the refugees here in these countries. Because, like you mentioned it, Toni, this will help not only the small and medium-sized companies, and it will not only help the refugees, it will also help the local companies and the local business. And I think this is a very important aspect from a short-term perspective. And it is very clear when we talk about the needed infrastructure, looking at the figures we have to handle with in the most countries we are talking about, the figures on the number of refugees we are talking about, then it is very clear we need expertise from the private sector to handle these challenges. The OECD is working very closely with the MENA region, not only with the OECD MENA initiative about governance and investments. We are working with many countries here in the region since 10 years now. We are also working for the G7 Deauville partnership in the transition countries, for example, when we talk about SMEs. And when I look at these different projects, and I will give a few very concrete examples of our work in the region, because I can imagine this is much more helpful to discuss how can we strengthen the situation of the private sector here in the region. Then it is very clear most of these projects are with a mid-term and a long-term perspective. We all would wish that we have more impact in a short-term situation, because a short-term impact is needed, that's very clear. But I think we have to be honest and to say, okay, many things we can improve, many things we can work together with governments here in the region to improve business climate, to improve the investment framework. This will have a more midterm and long-term perspective. And this will be needed because, for example, what we need in the region when we look at the private sector engagement is foreign direct investment. It is often forgotten that the foreign direct investment in the region here has shrunk by 50% between 2008 and 2013. And we can engage as many donors as we will find all over the world. If foreign direct investment by private investors will shrink by 50%, it is very clear that this is a problem when we talk about creating jobs, when we talk about business perspectives in the future. And that's the reason why a lot of our work is focused on how can we mitigate risks for investors, how can we improve the investment framework. We have a policy framework for investment developed with many countries. And we just, last week, we have seen in the Iraqi parliament a new investment law which passed the parliament last week or 2 weeks ago, which was developed by the Iraqi government with the OECD to improve the investment framework, and there is a clear checklist, and I think this will be helpful also in a mid-term perspective. When we talk about investment, I think it is also very important that we need less uncertainty, more security, because a lot of investment we will need here in the near future is investment in infrastructure, investment in energy, especially renewable energy. This is something we can only deliver, from my perspective, we can only deliver with support of the private sector. But if you are a private company in a globalized economy, you have hundreds of opportunities where to invest. And that means you need some incentives. You need as less risk as possible before you are sure that you will invest in this region. And this is something we have to work on. And one example is our work with Egypt here in the region. There is a court of cassation in Egypt. This is the highest court. And in this court, there is a backlog of 250,000 cases based on bankruptcy of a business partner, based on a case with discussions about property rights, whatever. There are many different reasons why there are so many cases. But all these cases and the whole backlog of 250,000 cases is a clear signal that private investors who will think about to go to Egypt will say, okay, this is maybe not a good idea, because if I have some juridical problems in this country, sorry for that, Anis, if I have some problem in this country, maybe there is another opportunity in another country in the neighborhood where this will not happen. That's the reason why we work on this court of cassation with the Egypt government to improve the business climate in the country. A last remark when we talk about investment is we have to look at public procurement. It is often forgotten that here in the region, public procurement stands for a relatively high share of GDP. In Tunisia, for example, nearby 20% of the whole GDP of Tunisia is based on processes of public procurement. That means to establish a very well-working, a sound framework of the process of public procurement is something very relevant for the region to decrease corruption, to improve the situation for the private sector here in the region. Often special economic zones are mentioned when we talk about private sector engagement. I only want to highlight that the OECD counted a few weeks ago 186 special economic zones in the region. I think that's a clear proof that most of these special economic zones are not working very well, because if we have 186 special economic zones and the situation is as worse in many countries as it is very clear we have to look at these special economic zones. What are the reasons for that? What are the deficits? And we will publish a handbook early 2016 with clear recommendations what is relevant for a well-working special economic zone here in the region. One more aspect, maybe also with a short-term perspective. What is often underestimated here in the region is the labor participation of women. It is well known that the labor participation rate of women in most of the countries here in the region is relatively low, but it is the same with the female entrepreneurship. And when we talk about creating jobs, when we talk about supporting small and medium-sized companies here in the region, I think we have to use the whole talent pool of entrepreneurship, and this will not work without female entrepreneurship. And that's one reason why 2 of our projects are focused on female entrepreneurship, and we just started last week also a project here in Jordan with the Jordan government about strengthening the participation of women in the parliamentary work. I think this is also a very important step which will have an impact to female entrepreneurship. And one last comment, and then I will finish. One last comment. Let's have a look also on the regional integration of the economy. I'm a European, and you all know that one success story of the European Union is the regional integration of the economies in the European Union. When you look at the MENA region, when you look at the countries around Jordan, the regional integration of the economies, regional markets, are one of the weakest in the world. But it is very clear that there is a lot of potential to improve the economic situation here in the region, and we should try to strengthen the regional integration of the economies here in the MENA region. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insights. I think what's of particular interest too is the idea of the special economic zones. Why have they flourished in some cases, and why in others have they not been as successful? So I think the handbook that you're doing will be very informative. In addition, really engaging the entire population, including women, in entrepreneurial activities as well as SMEs and other things, I think is critical. So. That's good. Yeah, that's a good omen. Yes, indeed. With that, I would like to introduce Mr. Amir Abdulla. Mr. Amir Abdulla has a vast wealth of experience with WFP. He was formerly also the COO, overseeing WFP regional directors and directors of emergency. In addition, he was in charge of and leading the entire efforts for the field operations. So I would like to introduce, if you don't mind, we'll turn it over for your remarks. Right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Toni, and to my fellow panelists here. I think I'm very pleased to join this group because I think it's a very important discussion. There's a huge amount of effort is needed to to provide a response to the crisis that we face. And I think, we've been hearing constantly over the last day and a half that the long-term response, even medium-term response, is to actually do what all of us can to help build resilience of those that are affected, to build the resilience of the host communities, build resilience within the host nations, and and that is going to be a huge and immense task, which will require, in a sense, all hands on deck. And clearly, one of the critical partners in this, one of the critical actors, will be the private sector. So I'm really happy to be on this particular panel. I think also the World Food Programme were asked to join this particular panel because we have a lot of not only experience working with the private sector, but we've had tremendous results working with the private sector, and we've had tremendous results across the globe, but very much so in this region, and very much so in response to the protracted Syria crisis that we have now into its 5th year, with 11 million people displaced, 250,000 lives lost. I mean, really a crisis that is probably one of the worst that the world has seen for a while, but it's sort of come sharply into everyone's minds over the past few months. But for those who have been working in it, this is something that has been going on for years. So perhaps, as you said, sort of some examples that we would commit to. I'll certainly be happy to give some examples that we are fully committed to, that are fully operational, and that we have great results in, but ones that we're just starting and also planning to expand. I mean, as I said, I think for with the private sector, we really have the opportunity to build up proper resilience, because for resilience to be true and lasting, it needs to be sustainable. And sustainable means it needs to carry on long after any kind of either humanitarian or development response and input has taken place. It needs to be sustainable. And quite honestly, there's nothing more sustainable than the private, a healthy private sector, fully engaged, that will actually provide many of the services and provide employment opportunities. So that I think, the rationale of why we're here is clear. Let me focus a bit on some of those examples. First, inside Syria, there was a panel in this room just shortly before lunch about building resilience inside Syria. So on our response effort inside Syria, I mean, we are reaching 4 million people with food assistance inside Syria. Most of our assistance is delivered through food parcels, and to achieve that, we have, on any given day, there are over 300 trucks moving around inside Syria delivering food. Now, we don't own or run fleets of trucks. Those are all private sector. So the transport private sector is hugely important. And quite honestly, with the crisis that is ongoing, many of those transporters would have probably lost their livelihoods had we not at least been doing that. So we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we needed to without them, but it's not, it has helped keep that economy, which is a hugely important part of the economic sector, at least functioning. Secondly, the food that we have distributed, put into food parcels inside Syria, some of it has been procured locally, even inside Syria, but what wasn't procured there, I mean, a very little of this is actually brought from outside the region. Most of it has then been procured within the region, which has introduced tremendous amount into the food, both food producers and food suppliers in the region. And then inside Syria, what we've done as well is the food is brought in bulk. We do a lot of bulk buying, but we don't distribute that food in bulk. We put it down. We actually turn it into food parcels. A lot of that work is done inside Syria and has provided employment opportunity, and primarily, you'll be pleased to know, for women. So we have had women in that sector, because we found they're far more meticulous about how this is packed. And the other what we have done beside just providing the food like that is we have to a lesser extent, and I'll go into the greater extent. You mentioned the food voucher program, which is huge in our refugee, and I'll talk to the outside Syria in a minute. But we are now starting to do that in not at the same scale that we've done within the refugee operations, but in Latakia and in Homs, we're running programs particularly for pregnant women or nursing mothers where they can buy fresh, locally produced produce, eggs and milk and such sort of things. But it's all local produce, so it's helping with the nutritional status of the infants, but it's also helping with the market economy of smallholder producers. What we've done in the refugee communities in the neighbouring countries is when, as the crisis first broke and as people were first moving, we provided hot meals at certain point. We provided bread and dry rations in others. But as the system settled down, we have moved very much to what we sometimes refer to as digital food or e-food, and we providing the refugees themselves with either through sometimes mobile telephone systems, but primarily through something that's the equivalent of a credit card. I mean, I'm sure most of us are carrying little bits of plastic in our pockets, and so did many of these communities before the crisis. So what this did was it gave them the purchasing power to buy what they wanted and to create a little bit of competition between stores as to who was providing the better produce. But it stimulated also the local economy. Now, we were able to do this because of private sector, and private sector all the way through. From we had a great relationship with MasterCard, who helped us with the actual card system. But then we have over 500 shops that we have deals with where the refugees can purchase. We and this has actually put into the economy, passing through the refugees, giving them the purchasing power, but it was all purchased then within the host country market. It's over $500 million has actually gone into the economy like that. So, these are the huge amounts of funds that have gone in, but we have been able to implement it and put it out there and do it at scale and efficiently because of relationship with the private sector. So on what I would call the marketing side, in terms of the banking and financing of it, the provision of the vehicles and platforms we use. But then on the local producers and suppliers, and so when you actually combine what we've purchased directly ourselves plus the cards and things like that, it's somewhere close to $1.2 billion has actually gone in to the over the past couple of few years through that way. We also found that when people get that purchasing power and when they do it really not only stimulates the private sector and the shops and everything, but the people themselves. It creates a sense of normality. So it's we find that hugely important. So that is is one that's working very well, but we really want to expand on it and to try and improve the card mechanisms, and I'll talk a little bit about one way that we're doing that in a minute, which is actually we have moved to or are just starting implementing iris scans. So where people will by registering with the iris providing their identity, they're able to actually shop without having to have a piece of paper or a card or their identity identity, and it's just done on the thing, which has a huge advantage in terms of not having somebody steal your card, or you lose your card, and then you have to, if you have to go and get re-registered and debate. So that is actually something we're quite excited about. The other thing that it's done, it has allowed us to monitor, not to monitor what people are purchasing, to actually find out what are the sorts of things that people are doing with the funds that they have made, and we know that, like, for instance, the iris technology is just starting to be rolled out, and I can tell you that the first purchase with an iris scan technology was a can of luncheon meat. If anybody, I don't know if that'll go down as a historical fact, but it will for us, I suppose. So the one thing I think that the private sector has over is that they are in this for the long term, and it's done. We have found that for many businesses and businessmen, successful businessmen and businesswomen, they have a high degree of corporate social responsibility. So there are some the reasons like that for people getting into this, but they also know that it makes good business sense, that these are markets of the future, and therefore they are in this for the long term. This isn't just about a handout to keep people alive or something. This really is about investing for the future. So how can we really start to take it to scale and look for new ideas? Well, key amongst them is going to be information sharing. It's very important for humanitarian and development actors to recognize the private sector as an important part and be ready and open to share information and ideas and look for joint ways in which we can move. And I know that's not always natural to us, but it is something we can do. Secondly, is to look for the synergies, things that need to be done in the humanitarian development or resilience areas, such as, with what has gone on, there's a huge need for construction of schools, health centers, and so forth. That can all be best done by the private sector, and so we can look to that. Then, thirdly, we need to, within our sector, the humanitarian or development world, be prepared to think differently. Sometimes we get a little bit hung up on our own processes, our own legal systems, our own ways of doing our business. So we have to be open-minded and look across things. And finally, I think it really is about developing a relationship, not being afraid of the challenges that it poses, because it does pose huge challenges, but it also, as we have seen, it can lead to exciting new ways of doing business. And in fact, much of what we have learned over the last 4 or 5 years in this Syria operation, we will be taking and using elsewhere in the world. So, there's a silver lining in every cloud.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was extremely informative, and I think it just demonstrates how technology can dovetail with, in this case, a crisis situation where the private sector really rises to the occasion and develops new ways of doing business that are more efficient and cost-effective. So thank you very much, sir. I would like to pass the microphone now to His Excellency, Mr. Talal Abu-Ghazaleh. Mr. Abu-Ghazaleh is a very prominent Jordanian businessman. Sorry, sir. International businessman. He's made significant contributions in the professional services, intellectual property, education, knowledge economy, and IT. He's on the board of the UN Global Compact and chairman of the UN Global Alliance for ICT and Development. Excellency, please.
I would like to beg you to be tolerant with me, because I don't speak the diplomacy and eloquence of the UN community. I introduced, in fact, to the UN the business style of doing things and talking about things. First, I would like to put on the agenda a wish that we only use the term partnership. I don't like to be invited as an investor, a fund source. as an outsource, as a contractor. I hate when somebody thinks of me that way. Well, when you want the business sector with you, think of it as a partner. Business sector, as you very rightfully said, Madam Moderator, is the creator of knowledge and wealth. And you have to realize that everybody that works in the UN is paid by the business sector. So if you have that in your mind, you start to respect us in the business, because that's what I told our Prime Minister, that he works for us, because his salary is paid by our taxes. So I'm not insulting anybody, and that's what Carter told me himself. Jimmy Carter said, I'm the highest ranking employee in this country, and I get paid by the taxpayer, so I work for my employer, the business sector. So think of us as partners, please. Think of us as partners, and we would love to work with you. I am a product of the United Nations. I had my education simply because UNRWA made it possible for me to have my university education. So I love the United Nations, and anything I say here is out of love for the UN. I want to applaud the UN in establishing for the first time a real partnership with the business sector. On August 28, which was Partnership Day announced in New York, a partnership between the United Nations and the private sector was established. The UN represented by UN Habitat and the private sector represented by Talal Abu-Ghazaleh organization. And the result is a digital network for the smart urbanization of the world. And I will be on the 16th in Barcelona with my co-chair. This organization was co-chaired, and it's the first time. I have served at least 10 times as chairman of UN positions, including UN Compact, including the ICT task force, but this is the first time that it is a partnership, and we are working together. Equal, wonderful, loving partners. That's the way we would like to look at it. In Jordan, we have done the same thing, and thanks to Zena here, we have developed a partnership between the UN and the business sector for the purpose of working together in Jordan. And we have, we wanted to mention one project. One project I suggested was to try to promote and encourage the business community, the architectural community, and the technology community to develop housing solutions that can provide affordable, intelligent homes. If the world can produce the edge, which is supposed to be the most smart, or the smartest building in the world in Amsterdam, where you can have everything smart, and that is very expensive. I am sure that technology can produce a cheap house. Instead of putting these refugees in tents and in makeshift places. This is a challenge, and unfortunately, the housing business has been very, very backward. There has not been any development, any serious development in the technology of building homes, especially for affordable and cheap houses. Now, that is one thing I would call upon the global community, and I'm going to address it in Barcelona, where we will have the launch of our global network. We called it Network 11 because it addresses the SDG number 11. We are commissioned now to work on how to achieve the SDG number 11. So we will be addressing this issue there. I've heard everything nice, and I always hear nice words about feeding people, housing them, treating them medically. One word is missing, and I know that one wonderful lady here, Miss Farina UNESCO, would love this: education. I think what these migrants need more than housing and more than food is education, because we need to build them to become citizens of the future. And we're doing that thanks to organizations like the UN, various agencies, and the European Union. We are going next year to graduate out of Zaatari camp online 500 Syrian refugees while in the camp. there is something great that is overtaking the world. It's an avalanche. It's a tsunami called online education. It will change everything, and it's changing everything. Now, we can use that tremendous technology, and we are using it to educate. And I can tell you that out of these camps, we'll have in the Arab world some of the most educated and IT qualified persons in the region, because all they do is the only lifeline they have is this little gadget they have in their hands. So that's, I think, and I'm a refugee too, and I think this is one of the blessings of suffering. So education should be our top priority. I want these people to be able, when they go back home ever, even if it's on 20 years, to be self-dependent, to be able to contribute to their economies, and to be proud of themselves. The long-term resilience, therefore, is in equipping the migrants, whatever they are, with a means of living, with how to be able to survive on themselves. And that is something that I think we need to address more seriously. What next? I don't like conferences that end with wonderful speeches and lousy speeches like mine. I would like to see some follow-up. We need to have a task force to follow up on this issue, not just finish here and go home. We haven't done anything if we finish here and go home. We better have not come. I think what we need is a task force that would address on a continuous basis, as an institution, and not as a study group or as a committee. There will be something, because we are going to live with this problem not for years, for decades. I have no doubt in my mind that we have this migration problem for one reason or another. It's going to be there for many decades. So we're not talking about something that will pass after tomorrow. We need to build an institution that can provide resilience and support it. I have 3 minutes more. Now, in order to wrap up, I would like to say that I think this is worth also being a subject for the next summit. I think raising this issue, which has always been addressed as an issue of help. The UN system has always looked at these situations as cases where people need to be helped. I don't want them to be helped. I want them to be enabled. I want them to be structured and to be capacity built to be able to be self-dependent. We are working online with ladies in the camps and outside the camps, in occupied territories like in Palestine and everywhere, on productive work online. Women can be utilized, especially gender solutions, can come out of online education. That is the greatest blessing of this time. Now, I like your mention of the fact that businessmen realize that corporate social responsibility makes good business sense. I founded the Global Compact with Kofi Annan, and I was his vice chair, and as well as the vice chair of Ban Ki-moon on this project, the Global Compact. I found in my experience that the more I give to society, the more business I get. Society pays you back. In fact, from the start, our survival depends on the society. The society is our source of income, or our source of business. So if we recognize that here is a business that has been responsible for the prosperity of my business, and I want to pay back my debt to that society, the society recognizes it and pays you back again in manifold. We have seen this as an organization, and I think one of the reasons of our success in whatever we're doing, or whatever success, has been because of the recognition of the society that we are good corporate citizens. We serve the society. We feel that we have a responsibility for the society. And as such, I would like to also, in final point, we always talk about the refugees as a problem. They are not. I can assure you that there is a blessing to the country that hosts the refugees. I was talking to the former president of Germany, Mr. Bush, and he reminded me that in 1948, Germany absorbed 10 million refugees. And Germany was only 40 million at that time. Germany is a great example of a country that hosted people and made use of these refugees. Of the refugees on any economy. They are a purchasing power, they are cheap labor, and they are which can produce productive, competitive products, and they have in many ways they bring another cultural perspective, and in many ways they are a blessing. I think we need to produce a study on the positive impact of refugees. And I would like to not call them refugees from now on, call them guests. These people should be treated with a human respect, with a feeling. I say this because I'm a refugee, and I'm very proud. I am a very proud refugee. I don't mind being called a refugee myself, but I wouldn't call a refugee. I would call him a guest. These are guests, and we should recognize them as such, and call them as such, and treat them, and change the culture and psychology of dealing with them as being hosts to the guests. Thank you very much.
Indeed, I think that.
Toni, is it only allowed to say that this is not necessary that the UN spends money for such a kind of report, because the OECD did it, and you are totally right. In most countries, tax revenues, contribution to the social security system of migrants are positive. That means there's a positive impact to the economy.
Thank you, sir, for a very stimulating discussion. I think that we can all learn from Mr. Abu-Ghazaleh's kind message, and one that certainly resonates in terms of how we look at the refugee population, what can be done, and all the things that he has been able to accomplish. We can certainly admire and thank you for all of them. Now I would like to ask Mr. Yannick Dupont to please provide some details on a company called Spark and some of the other major endeavors that you're working on. Mr. Yannick Dupont is a professional primarily in higher education and private sector, development in post-conflict areas. But he also has a very interesting company that develops entrepreneurs and trains young, empowers the young people to embark on private sector activities, primarily in post-conflict societies. And so, therefore, I would like to ask him to please provide us with some information about your activities.
Thanks, Toni. Yeah, well, first of all, I'm here with double hat. Yes, I'm the director of Spark, a Dutch NGO working in 15 fragile states on training, coaching, access to finance for young entrepreneurs. Also a lot in and around Syria. But I'm also co-chairing, together with UNDP, a Solutions Alliance working group. The Solutions Alliance is basically was established last year in Copenhagen at the Danish Foreign Ministry. looking at how we can find new solutions to the migration crises around the world, recognizing what we heard today very often, that there's 60 million forced migrants. And within that initiative, which is donors and NGOs and private sector representatives and host governments, we formed a working group where also UNHCR, ILO, ITC, but also NGOs like World Vision, ourselves, and companies are actually looking at this particular issue. I will come back to it at the end briefly. Well, first of all, I mean, over the last year, we have been quite active with that working group, and also from Spark way before in our day-to-day work. And one thing, when I saw the title, Engaging the Private Sector, I think it was already hinted a bit here, with the partnership, actually, that it's very... Exactly. So I think we need also to not underestimate how difficult it is, actually, between humanitarian development and private sector to cooperate. And I think there's many reasons, but I want to just highlight 3. I think just to start with what you mentioned is that very often, and I would call that engaging the private sector old school, was seeing the private sector as basically a bag of money, right? So we the humanitarians or development actors are doing something important, something good. So we're approaching a businessman to give money. And I think we've moved way beyond. And I think the best examples that we are seeing, and I think the MasterCard example is a shining example, is what Michael Porter from Harvard actually referred to a few years ago as shared value. So basically where the company on its core business is working together with development partners. So it's not anymore about the private sector delivering something to a humanitarian crisis actor, but it's actually working in partnership on a shared value, where also the company sees an added value to the work it's doing. Very often, actually, you see companies also recognizing or learning that in very difficult environments there is good money to make. So maybe not immediately so, but we see this a lot now with Turkey. Actually, you see a lot of companies actually looking at Syria from a desire to help. But I also spoke to a lot of business people who told me quite frankly, well, if we are now helping, and if we are engaging, and if we're doing things together with between Gaziantep region and the Aleppo region, which are old economic partners, after the conflict, there will be a lot of business to be made. So you see that I think in the business community there is both an honest will to help, but there's also, of course, business interests which are very legitimate in my view. So anyway, so I think we need to move beyond the traditional CSR towards shared values, and it's exactly this partnership approach. The second, I think we need to move beyond distrust. So I think there's a lot of distrust from companies towards the development sector, humanitarian sector, seeing it as a very bureaucratic sector, as a very closed sector. And vice versa, very often when I speak to development partners, you hear people say, but I mean, why do you work with Spark with Chevron in Liberia, or with Heineken we work in Burundi, or and I get attacked and say, but these companies they just want to make money. And we're like, well, yes, they want to make money. They're a company, but actually, if they're more efficient than what we're doing, or if they're more efficient at creating jobs than mostly governments, what's the problem with that, right? So, but it's really a distrust issue, and I think it's also a shadow we need to jump over within our own development sector. Anyway, that's just more a general observation. Now, before I come to my case, which is actually on education, so I think that will hopefully build on the earlier speaker. Just also want to raise attention to what we're seeing, and that's within the work we're doing within Spark. We're working with a lot of higher vocational education and also supporting business around Syria, of Syrian refugees, and even inside Syria. And so what we do see is the very important role of diaspora and circular migrant entrepreneurs. So we see a lot of initiatives by Syrian business community based out of Dubai, for example. There's many examples. But also starting initiatives supporting young entrepreneurs in the region, like Yusur we met in Lebanon, or the Asfari Foundation, Rabbani. I can go on. And I think they're actually a very important actor, because these are really business people who really care and understand the region. And I think when we talk about engaging the private sector, I would really start with them, and not only necessarily immediately with bigger Western firms. Of course, we should not forget about them, and a MasterCard, I think, is a wonderful example. Now then to come to the case, and that's where I'm going to round up. So we were asked to give a concrete case, and actually it's also something that that I was going around in this conference to get some more support for, political support mostly. As Spark, we've actually been looking at the education challenge. So according to recent research of actually the European Union did an excellent study that estimates that about 400,000 Syrian youth, refugees between 18 and 24 at this very moment, are not in post-secondary education, some of them for 4 years. So you can imagine the impact of this. This crisis will not be solved tomorrow. So we're looking at losing a generation or maybe more. So we've been placing, with support from the Netherlands so far, about 250 students in universities in the region. But actually we started with a failure, and maybe that's also an important thing to mention. We started actually by bringing 13 Syrians to the Netherlands. And that was a very cost-ineffective approach. It was a state-driven approach. It was a request from Dutch Parliament, so we did comply, and we are a partner to our government, so we helped to implement it. But we found it was factor 7 to 20 more expensive than doing this in the region. So I really want to also emphasize the importance of regional investment, another key topic at the conference. 7 to 20 times more cost efficient. But also there we found a great partner with both governments here in the region and with the private sector. And we're now on the eve of hopefully starting to roll out up to 10,000 placements in the coming 14 months. So 10,000 youth, placing them in these universities and colleges in the region. And we could not have done that without the private sector. And I really want to also welcome Ibrahim Al-Safari from the Luminous Group. You're a partner here in Jordan, and a private business college group with excellent international accredited degrees. Actually offering, you really offered partnership, and you dropped the rates. You looked at your rates, you looked at how can we do this cost efficiently, keep the quality. With Saint Joseph in Lebanon, they were very open to discuss modalities, so it's affordable. So working with the private education providers and the state education providers, it is possible to get a very efficient deal. Of course, and that's of course where we are getting worried, is that we did speak to the private sector and the governments about what about when they graduate, right? So what about when these kids graduate, where will they work? And if you have already high unemployment in the region now, what are the sectors that we should be enrolling them in, so that in 3 to 4 years they could find employment? And that's where we're going to need a lot of help, I think, with our initiative in making sure that if these 10,000 kids start graduating in 3 years, 4 years, where will they work? And we'll need then a proper response from the government, but also from the private sector to make sure these are absorbed. And that's my next challenge, I think, to focus on. And I would very much welcome if any of you have ideas on that to approach us. Then just I was asked to end with one invitation. I mentioned that I'm also here for the Solutions Alliance primarily. And on the 2nd of December in Geneva, with all the partners I mentioned, we are organizing a business meeting. We are inviting companies. We have about 25 to already up to 50, I think, are showing interest to come. And it's a whole day about innovative business-led solutions to migration. We are identifying cases where business is playing a very central role. We're still looking for good cases. So if you have any, do come, and do come to Geneva with them. And what is interesting to mention there is that actually the agenda we're going to have done, half of it is going to be led by the private sector. So we're asking them to draft half the contents, lead the sessions, and then as development partners we will be invited to their panel, and and the other way around, 50% by development, inviting the private sector. So that's where I wanted to end my my intervention for now. Thanks.
sorry, I have magic with this. It just goes off. But I think that certainly your... Certainly, this initiative in Geneva, I think, would be very welcome, especially with the sharing of having the private sector development agenda as well as development sector. And it gets back to that whole idea of integration and not having the stovepipes that are so very common in many forms. Thank you again. With that, I'd like to introduce Her Excellency, Ms. Sinaka. Sinaka is an ambassador from Finland. She's most recently been, her career has been primarily in African countries. She most recently was an ambassador in Tanzania as well as in Zambia. Her career has been in development area and also all of your career has been in foreign affairs. So we very much look forward to her insights given that she's coming from a different perspective, a different area of the world, but she has some very good thoughts.
Thank you so much, and I hope you are not too exhausted yet, because I would like to talk to you about partnerships for innovations and education, and innovations and women. But before that, I want to really thank the UN family and UNDP for championing this paradigm shift of breaking the silos between humanitarian work and development work. And we are looking forward to working with UNDP in this area. In fact, I'm happy to announce here the Finnish contribution of 4 million euros to UNDP's regional work on livelihoods and social cohesion. So we are looking forward to continued work. We all know that this year is a big year for development. We have the Sustainable Development Goals. We have the Addis Ababa Agenda for Action, and there will be the Paris Climate Conference. We cannot implement and achieve these goals without active involvement of the private sector. Because the challenges caused by conflicts, big refugee numbers, education, getting energy, clean water, housing, whatever, they are far too big challenges for governments to solve. We have to create partnerships. And we all know that private sector is the source of innovation. It's the engine for economic growth everywhere in the world. They create jobs, they provide goods and services for people. So my main message, in fact, is that we need to create new partnerships. Partnerships must involve the public and the private sectors, and also civil society, academia, and diasporas. Many of these points have come up with the previous speakers. We have to stop working in silos. This is my main message. And in fact, this forum was a test case for us, and I'm very, very happy that the Finnish innovation stand in the innovation marketplace. We do this. It was established at our joint initiative by the Finnish NGO, Finnish Church Aid, and there are 2 startup IT companies, there are Funzi and Fusu, and then there is a construction company innovating some mobile housing techniques. So we are testing and we are learning, but I'm very happy for that we managed to do it here. We are also in Finland making a new development policy at the moment with important objectives like women's rights and rights of the children and support to private sector and so on, so on. Key element there is the engaging or partnering with the private sector. Then how do we make innovations work? The creation of these partnerships with private sector may require some support, especially at the beginning of the of a project cycle. Many donor countries have donors have put in place instruments to support business partnerships and matchmaking. We have one called Finn Partnership in Finland, and these have proved useful for studying, making feasibility studies, looking for partners, and so on. Challenge funds may be good for innovations. Finland's newest instrument is BEAM, Business with Impact, and this is a joint Innovations for Development program between the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland and the Finnish Funding Agency for Technology. So we are testing new instruments, how we would partner better with the private sector. Providing support is important, but of course it's not enough. Because new ideas become innovations only when they are adopted by the users, such as businesses and consumers. And that is why co-creation is fruitful. Local and external parties looking for solutions to present problems together. Our companies and non-governmental organizations engage low-income communities in designing products, services, packaging, distribution channels, business models. And this kind of co-creation benefits both. And it's also interesting to the businesses because businesses from Finland, because they may build some longer-term business partnerships. In Finland, we have several platforms like this, such as the Aalto Global Impact and Impact Igloo, this is of Aalto University. There is a Nordic Frugal Innovation Society, and Weeconomy of the World Vision Finland. What we have been discussing a lot recently in Finland is how NGOs and private businesses could work better together. Maybe the most prominent and very timely event now is the Slush, an annual huge Finnish startup and investment event. It's taking place, in fact, in Helsinki this week. It's one of the biggest in the world. Previous year there were like 14,000 participants from 3,500 companies and 750 investors. And it's starting there, and part of it is what we call Slush Impact Program, with emerging market startups taking part. A lot of activities and a lot of chances for the startups and businesses and investors and development partners meeting each others. So you asked for one commitment, Madam Moderator. I will commit that I will continue supporting the innovations, and in fact I would have a proposal that next time when you continue this resilience platform, you would also have something like Slush part of it, so that there would be businesses that would get a chance to meet other businesses, startups, academics, development practitioners to find new solutions. Secondly, about education. Right now, as we speak, in fact, Finland and UNICEF are co-hosting a Startup to Scale Up Global Innovations for Children and Youth Summit in Helsinki. This is also part of the Slush Impact Program that I mentioned. It's a very busy week, and my minister has announced this morning that Finland will contribute 1.5 million euros to the UNICEF Innovation Fund next year. Finland is known for being an innovation-based society. We were not this all the time. There was a structural transformation, a very drastic one, We used to be a resource-based economy, but then we invested a lot to the education sector, we invested a lot to the ICT sector, and on research and development that helps business innovations. These are part of the knowledge economy ecosystems that are needed. And we know that in the education sector there are a lot of mobile applications that can be used. Those in the Finnish stand, Funzi and Fusu, they are some examples of the new technologies. There are others like sun energy moderated e-readers that could provide help with technology in this kind of crisis or post-conflict or refugee situations. And we have experiences of those, but we are also learning, and the best way is to learn together. Then lastly, but not least, about women, economic growth and innovations. Finland is strong in technology, but innovations certainly are not only about technology. Social innovations have played a very important role also in our economy. For example, the maternity package given to every mother of a newborn, or the free school meal since 1948, in fact, provided in Finland. These have promoted the well-being very much. And one of the keys to innovations is diversity. So we have to integrate, we have to involve youth, women, migrants, refugees, because all these can bring new ways to things and how to create innovations. And we need to remove all obstacles for their participation. What comes to women, it can be, for example, supported by the government, like children's daycare, or it can be some special grants to support or loans to support women to start businesses. There are good reasons for including women in participation, because economic growth is linked to gender equality. What we need is mostly change of attitude, because women's participation is sensible economics. UN Women's recent report showed that if female employment were to match male employment, GDP could increase everywhere. For example, by 27% in the Middle East and North Africa, and by 19% in South Asia. Bringing all to technology, even though in Finland women do pretty well, even us, we think that we would have come up with even more competitive products if we had involved women more in the ICT sector. So this is my last point, that nobody should exclude women from making innovations in whatever is the sector or field we are working with. Thank you.
Integrated workforce,
Thank you, Toni. I think I'm here for a reason that I didn't understand at first, where Anita called me and said, we want you to come for the private sector dealing with refugees. I didn't really see the link until we had a few sessions and started realizing what was going on. But I'm an Egyptian first and then a businessman, so I'll start by correcting your information, Stefan. He said that we have 250,000 court cases in the Court of Cassations, but 6 years ago we realized that and we started something called the commercial courts. So if you invest in Egypt or if you have a business in Egypt, your case is settled in commercial courts. So the 250,000 cases are an old backlog that doesn't apply to the business today. The second point that was raised around here, and I get very jealous when I defend Egypt, is women. I mean, they usually tell us that the head of the family is the man, and in our mythology, the woman is the neck. She makes the head move, and you learn that very quickly. I mean, yeah, it's true. You go home and you're tired, and your wife says, "Do you want dinner?" And you say, "Yes." "What are my options?" And she says, "You have two options: dinner or no dinner." Right? So you learn very quickly that women control what you have to do. I also want to give a little hint about Egyptian history. We've had immigrants all our lives. We had refugees as far as you can think. When the Armenians were persecuted in Turkey, they came to Egypt. When the Jews were not comfortable in Europe, they came to Egypt. When the Italians had problems in Italy, they came to Alexandria. The Greeks came to Alexandria. So what we learned from this experience is that Egypt knows very well how to be all-inclusive. We know how to assimilate different cultures and different skills into our society and take the best out of them. And if you look around the world, the most successful societies have been the most inclusive societies. Now switching to what was said here before, I want to change the word education to the word employability. I think that education is a luxury. You can learn to read and write and go all the way to a PhD. Being employable is different. I mean, I can buy a new machine and take somebody and teach him how to use that machine in 3 or 4 months, and then he's employable. I created a job. I don't think that in our part of the world today we have the luxury of waiting for people to be educated. We want them to be employable. Job creation is the name of the game. So, having said that, I put myself in a situation where I go talk to a business person and tell them we have Syrian refugees in Egypt and we need your help. And I am sure that the first reaction I will get is we have plenty of poor people in Egypt. We have plenty of poor unemployed people in Egypt. Why would I work with Syrians? And I think that I learned most of what I'm going to tell you during this conference. It was a real eye-opener, and I thank the organizers for that. You realize that this is not a short-term problem. Those refugees are in Egypt to stay in Egypt. There will be there, I think, for 10, 15 years. People who said 5 years, I think, are very optimistic. It's a very complicated problem, and it's very difficult to relocate people even into their home countries after they've been away for a long time. So, bottom line, like I was talking about options, I don't think we have an option. We don't have the luxury of saying, do we want to work with them or don't we want to work with them? And I'm sorry, I'm taking a very blunt business approach. I am not insensitive to the humanitarian side. I mean, it's heartbreaking to see what the Syrians are going through. It's heartbreaking to see a child on a beach. It's heartbreaking to see little young women in Egypt putting their dowry as almost a sales price. It sounds like slavery is back. And it's heartbreaking and ugly. But when you talk to business people, you have to talk win-win. And the minute you approach them, what they say, what's in it for us? And I think that one of the most serious impediments to business development is instability. And when you talk about refugees being in our neighborhoods, because we don't have camps, the Syrians live among the Egyptian society, you have to realize that there is a human side, there is a financial side, and there is a security side. And we've learned the lesson very fast that if you don't employ somebody, they turn to mischief. And you're going to have instability, and thus it will be counterproductive as far as creating employment is concerned. There is something called the cost of a job created. If you invest a certain amount of money and you invest it well, you're going to generate a certain amount of profit. And that profit may employ you and someone else. But if you don't invest that money, you're not going to get a job. And in the defense of the private sector, I always say, I've never seen a poor man work for a poor man. I mean, somebody needs to make the money to pay his employees or to pay the people who work. So the initiative has to start somewhere with investment. So are we willing to invest in order to protect ourselves and protect our businesses and put in the cost of a job created in the system in order to benefit from it? Are going to be sensitive to the fear and want of people? Yes. All of the above is yes, I'm sure. You cannot expect to get foreign direct investment if you don't have stability, and you will not have stability if you don't have all the criteria of business, which is exit and the repatriation possibility and everything that we need for business. But stability is one of the most important of them. So I think, from a humble opinion, that the partnership is the best way to function. And of course, everything I'm going to say will need scaling up, otherwise it will be irrelevant. I think that if you have a partner, you're not going to burn his factory because it's partially yours. So creating partnerships between Egyptians and Syrians, I think, is the best way to move ahead. And I'm going to jump the gun for a second and go to what Toni asked us to do at the onset, which is give a proposition, because the proposition ties into that directly. I think that we should have a website that gives first awareness about the problem. Because everything I learned yesterday and today, and I pretend to be well attuned and have my ear to the ground, is way over what I knew before I came. So I think that the layman should be able to have information about the refugee problem, understand the refugee problem, and understand what to do with it. And then have on that website well-studied business proposals where we would have a requirement to have like 50% Egyptian, 50% Syrians in terms of stock ownership. And that would encourage people to come in. Excuse me, Mr. Ambassador, but I don't want to work with the government. I mean, I think the government should create the enabling environment for business, but I cannot partner with the government. What the government can do is to give incentives to the private sector. So I would say that if these companies are formed and functional, we would give a tax credit to a certain percentage of their earnings and give some advantage or create a free zone where the joint stock companies can function constructively and be exempted from 1%, 2%, whatever of their, have some kind of exemption as an incentive. We can also, we are creating at the Ministry of Investment in Egypt something called the one-stop shop or the one-shop stop. It depends on how you look at it. But you have to be able to go somewhere and make that business easy. And if we do that and give an advantage to the people who form joint ventures in terms of expediting the process of their registration and incorporation, I think we will encourage a lot of people to continue. And having said that, you have to also include in the website information that makes people understand that this is not an option, it's a must. Then there is another business angle, which is the fact that there are defensive industries that have to export to Syria. I mean, even if there are internally displaced people, I learned that term yesterday, by the way, and immigrants, and to the tune of 7 million, you still have 20 million people who live in Syria. And the people who live in Syria need the products of the defensive industries They need pharmaceuticals, they need food, they need to put clothes on their back, they need transportation, and by transportation I mean means of transportation and things that we can produce somehow. So if we start exporting to Syria, the first thing that would come to my mind, and who's going to pay me? Is there a bank in Syria that is accredited and acceptable where I can guarantee that my letter of credit would be honored and I will get paid? And I think that being here and having the UN people in the various offices ask what can we do, I think that at the beginning, instead of giving people money, we can start by securing, putting a fund to ensure the payments of the people who deliver essential goods to the Syrians at a decent price. I mean, we're not going to go sell caviar and champagne. You're talking about selling the basic goods that people need. And the international organizations have the means and power to secure international commercial transactions. And that will really help the exporter, the importer, and the final users. Having done that, we will create the community cohesion. I mean, we will create we will cover the financial side, we will cover the social side, and the role of the government, the second role of the government, would be to provide the security. There are areas where you don't need a lot of technology. And one of the examples that came up is that the Syrians are very good handymen. And you have little shops in Egypt that provide repairs in homes, and they don't do a very good job. So they do a bad job and they leave the next day, because most of the good ones want to work in the Gulf and Saudi Arabia and whatever, and we're left with people who do halfway jobs. So if you create some kind of franchise where you have the Syrians and the Egyptians team up, like the Quick Fix in England or something that has brand recognition, and you have a recourse. If somebody does a good job, you have a warranty, a bad job, you have a warranty, and you can get your job redone. I mean, there are lots of ideas where we can help them collaborate, and I think that the franchising system provides a great way to start businesses, because usually the franchisor will do your market study, will give you the internal control system, will train your employees, will give you the branding, and you don't have to spend a lot of time. I think that the other thing left that again has to do with the government in an indirect way is that after the Suez Canal project was completed, we're creating labor-intensive jobs that are paramount, huge jobs. And one thing the government could do is put 10% or 5% of the labor of the job set aside for refugees, so that we can incorporate them in the economic system, in the projects that are labor intensive, and get them fit into the society. I think that's my long and short answer.
Koray Balkaya, representative of Turkish Confederation of Employer Associations. Actually, that was a really fruitful meeting. I think all of the speakers had different angles on it. But one point was missing, actually. That was the challenge which employers face with on this crisis issue. In Turkey, and I'm sure in the other countries, all of the employers are expected to give something on this crisis, but employers has needs too. First and really basic thing is information sharing. Governments should share information about the situation in the country so that employers can make some preparations and strategic thinking on that. They should have time for it. Second thing is about the policy making structure. Employers and business world should definitely be included to the policy making structure, because at some point all of the 5 or 6 countries who had been affected from the Syria crisis, there will be an issue of work permits, including Syrian refugees into labor markets. These are really important issues, but without taking employers' opinion on it, just passing the laws through the parliaments will create a huge chaos in the future. So I think these topics are really important to discuss. Maybe I didn't ask any questions, but that's a different angle to take into account.
Thank you. My name is Harry Hummels, and I have several reasons for being here. And one is actually working for the Dutch pension sector. And Dutch pension funds are quite rich, and they really are interested in investing in development. They're currently developing impact investment programs, etc., and they're willing to deploy billions. The question is, where are the projects? They have specific issues with finding right projects. Second problem they're facing, Mr. Aquamendos already mentioned it, finding an enabling environment. So governments and businesses can help to create an enabling environment. And thirdly, that was also mentioned by you, Madam Chair, is indeed the adequate de-risking. They have lots of opportunities to invest all over the place. And why would they invest here? If you find the right de-risking, and if we are able, as investors, as private sectors, and as donors, to really team up and find the right investment approach, then the private investors will come and invest for transportation, energy, waste management, and all the things that are clearly needed, as we've heard in this conference. Finally, I would like to make a remark. In the previous sessions today, there was talk about billions needed for development. With all due respect, I think we're talking about millions here today. And I really would urge this conference to, and I would echo Mr. Abu-Ghazaleh's call for a task force, because I think you're right. We need to step up and be able to create an environment in which those billions can come to this region instead of millions. And that is, to me, a large gap between this session and the previous ones.
Thank you, sir. Should we go ahead and have with Mr. Abu-Ghazaleh? Would you like to address? No? Okay. Anis.
I think that to answer your point, you have to marry Mr. Abu-Ghazaleh's proposition with mine, is that you have a task force that would develop that website and continue to keep it updated by putting the information for awareness to potential projects that are well studied and the mechanism that will allow the implementation in a doable manner. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Abdulla. I am from Kurdistan Federation of Chamber of Commerce, and I am following what have been said here about the problem. In fact, when we come here, we like to share vision about the future of the region. We should not talk only about Syria, in fact. We have our own example in Kurdistan, how we try to do something in this respect. I add my voice to Mr. Abu-Ghazaleh that the principle of this work should be based on the partnership. And we need two kinds of partnership. First is between UN and the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce is representing the private sector. Then we need another partnership between different Chamber of Commerce of these countries, either in the region or with outside. For example, in Kurdistan, we just start pilot project with UNDP for economic empowerment of women. We choose three small business. We give them a grant on condition that they expand their business by hiring people from refugee and displaced people. It was a big success. We send our final report to them. Now we have another initiative with the Chamber of Commerce of Sweden, a partnership between us and Sweden Chamber of Commerce to help the youth for skill building, you mentioned it, so we prevent them from migration as well. Because if we failed here with this task you are talking about, these people going to knock the door on Europe. They will not stay here anymore. And it is not a matter only to help to feed them, to accommodate them. Capacity building is important. And after capacity building, we need mobilization of this skill to help other people as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Mr. Ambassador?
Thank you. Well, first I would like to thank all members of the panel. I think it was a very useful session, and as a government representative, I was keen to attend this particular session because I think the private sector and governments need to work very closely on this issue. And with all due respect, I think you would make a very good government representative, Mr. Eklemendio, so I think you better revise your position. Well, no, I think it's important. What you've mentioned is, I would like to add to what you mentioned as ideas. I know, and you know, that many Egyptian companies do have a program for corporate social responsibility. And I think maybe through the AmCham, you may go back and try to think, to factor in supporting Syrian refugees residing in Egypt through the corporate responsibility programs that many Egyptian companies do apply right now. And if there is anything on the part of the government that you would need us to discuss, we would be very much happy and ready to do this. Thank you.
By the way, I thank you for this comment. We have 1,950 members at the American Chamber of Commerce in Egypt, and we have a special committee for CSR. One of the wonderful things about the new CSR concept today is, again, win-win. And the example I use all the time is Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola went to villages that didn't have potable water. They purified the water, use it to manufacture Coca-Cola, and the village gets water. So we have to think of ideas that are win-win, where the CSR money to be sustainable and long-term has to be something that gives back something to the company and the community.
Thank you. I think we'll take one more, please, in the back. Then we'll do a wrap-up.
Haider Mustafa from Ministry of Planning, KRG. I think it is good to be realistic and to talk very loudly, to say the roads are not paved to have businesses in the MENA countries generally. In the environment of a low profile of business index, according to the World Bank, corruption issue, lack of transparency, and governance issues, we should fight for all of that and to have our roles in integrating the private sector. I was 6 years Director General in Board of Investment in Kurdistan region. First visit, it was for Jordan. We didn't listen to them. They asked us, do market intelligence process or study before starting your business. We didn't listen to them. We should have a clear opportunities and a real opportunities. Not to, for example, FDI, they have a very difficult issues. When they come to the countries, they may stay ages, months, until they will be licensed, or even sometimes they will not be licensed. So we should have a clear law legislation and force the government, our government, everyone's government, to have some good reforms in having more incentives and opening real opportunities, and to have a transparency in public procurement, to have a clear opportunities to one-stop shop, as their excellencies referred to that. It's very good lessons to be shared everywhere. Thank you so much. It's a question how we can do all of that together. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I don't know if we have an answer to that today, but hopefully we've stimulated some thought regarding how to do it. Yes, sir. One more, and then we'll have to wrap up because we do have the last session. If you could please ask a question. Okay, please. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Really, I listened well to all these lectures. All these lectures, I listened to them because here is only we are listeners, and there is no discussion that the person should ask, and he will get his reply or response. First of all, the refugees, I don't like to call them in this way because these are ourselves. We are responsible for them, whereas as I see, you are, because we are, there's a joint idea between us, all of us are human beings. So we'd like to thank you very much because you try to show us the way, whereas we have to tell you how to show you the way to help us. You see, this is fair thing. The second thing, really, I'd like to show you that you respect us more, and we like to tell you that you are very kind for us. The private sector is like man and woman with the government. We don't know who is responsible for the matter, the government or the private sector. The private sector in Middle East is under the control of the government, whereas in your countries, in Europe, everything is controlled by private sectors. Therefore, if you try to tell us how to work and how to do, first of all, you have to focus on the role of the government, and then if they give us a chance, we can do and we can create something. We can invent something. But if you limit our hands, therefore, we can do nothing. And excuse me for lengthening my speech. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Excuse me, let me speak. This is Mr. Amjad Jaburi, who's the Baghdad Chamber of Commerce chairman in 2006. And really, we are two participants from Iraq, from private sector, he and me. And the other people speaks about Iraq, but they mentioned Kurdistan. So there is a place for Iraq in this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. I would like to just make a few comments. It seems like there were some themes that were repeated many times. First of all, partnership. Partnership has certainly been a word that's been very common throughout the presentations as well as throughout the comments today. And the partnership really takes many different forms. It seems like we are talking about breaking silos, eliminating distrust, being more inclusive, and taking advantage of the pool of resources that we all have in our countries. Innovation is another word that I think was very creatively explained, and that was in education, it was in technology, the iris scan, the smart urbanization. One thing we didn't speak too much about was R&D, research and development. A lot of private sector, the work the private sector does is research and development, which is extremely important as well. Diversity, how do we incorporate everyone in terms of a diverse kind of product? And how does diversity really lend itself to making a better product? Employability, we talked about education. Certainly the idea of online education is terribly important, and employability in terms of a win-win situation where you have people that are employable that do have a job once they are trained. A key I think challenge is really being able, through the private sector, to identify where the job gaps are and then where people can be employed once they are trained. We also, the backward linkages in terms of food, transport, local producers is extremely important. How do we get other industries involved when there is a big program like a food program? Investors, in Finland, for example, too, the development partnerships, the kind of social innovations, again, using diversity. And finally, the Geneva, the Innovative Solutions Forum that's coming up, and how that might factor in to certain things that are recommended for the London conference. It's also coming up in February. Finally, I'd just like to make a few comments in terms of recommendations. The first recommendation is a clear process and committed timeline. That would be identifying relevant private sector stakeholders to drive the process before the new year with the public sector. The reason we say new year is there's a very important conference coming up in London in February. Is anyone here from the British or from the United Kingdom that can say? Anyway, it's a very important conference, and some of the information from this forum will be explained and presented there. There'll be national kickoff meetings in January with the different people that are involved in this conference. National milestone plans, which have already been developed but would be in time again to present, and quarterly meetings. I think this would dovetail nicely with the task force idea that Mr. Abu-Ghazaleh and others have mentioned is some way to get organized. Second, an integrated setup around committed stakeholders. We need clearly defined roles, which is, I think, something, sir, that you have mentioned as well. And legal and regulatory framework is one of those roles. What is proposed is that the national government should commit to anchoring at and give a significant time commitment at the highest levels of government to create a joint unit which would be private sector driven but public in terms of where it's located, so that the private sector can actually have that kind of an opportunity to do what it does best. Also, the governments would ensure fast-track approval of projects and viable labor market solutions for those guests, refugees, but we're calling them guests in the country. B, the domestic private sector, facilitated by the chambers of commerce, should commit to contributing concrete and feasible project ideas, which may be, in fact, what our colleague from the Netherlands has spoken about. Some way where their project ideas are viable, they are transparent, there's accountability, and they can be implemented in a very compliant manner. Lending planning to these would be, again, these joint units, and encouraging the private sector companies to set up an agenda for innovation. We can take advantage of innovation, again, through the different forums, in addition to what private companies do on their own when there is a challenge. Finally, donors should commit to providing fast track and additional funding for private sector engagement, not at the expense of humanitarian. Many times there is a quid pro quo, and they'll say, we'll give you more money, but we won't give it for other things. You have to use it for one or the other. You cannot really commingle. And mobilize the private sector and donor companies in their capacity to plan, execute, and dedicate investment and CSR funds. Finally, UNDP should commit to facilitating the setup of this process with the resident coordinators in each country. Coordinate the interface between donors and ensuring transparency. And finally, facilitating cross-cultural learning. It's very important, if there are successes, to try to replicate those successes rather than duplicate and expend additional resources. One thing that was mentioned too was piloting successful initiatives. So in summary, we call on all leaders from all sectors, the private sector, the national governments, donors, NGOs, UN, international organizations, to implement an integrated plan. There are economies of scale that can be realized by a more integrated approach. Together, we can unleash the private sector's full potential to build resilience. Thank you.